Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. This tutorial is a dovetail to a previous one I did on sugar, so I'll put the link down below. If this is the first time you're finding me, welcome, and please consider subscribing to my channel. It helps the channel. And give a thumbs up or share this with somebody else who's struggling, because we're all struggling. If you look at the average person that goes into a primary care clinic, more than 50, I'd say about 60% of the folks are high on their body mass index. And that's just one parameter. And it's not to point the finger, but it's just to bring you realization of where we have gone from the 1970s, 1960s. So weight has increased. And for whatever reason, there's many, with weight increase usually comes cholesterol, insulin resistance, high blood pressure, and a couple other things as comorbid conditions. And those of you who have been following COVID, people in the United States that don't do well have comorbid conditions compared to people in Italy who live till 80 years of age, and they have just weak immune systems. Some of them do well. A lot of us in the United States that have comorbid conditions, some of them do well. Even in China, the people that die, mostly men, not mostly men, but majority men, even smokers will have a problem, but at a later age. So we definitely have a different formula here, and it's presenting. I think this COVID thing is making us kind of step back, pause, and say, hey, wait, what's good, what's not so good? Well, whether it's politics, government, economy, or lifestyle, health. But I want to talk to you about sugar, because it is probably the crux of a lot of problems. It's so tasty. When I was a runner in high school and college, I used to take sugar cubes, those little square, put them in my pocket, and then eat them while I was running, thinking that was energy. Sugar supposedly was energy because there's glucose in it. But I wanted to check out the video before because I talk about the basics. But so yes, sucrose or sugar cubes, white sugar, does have glucose. This is sugar. It does have glucose, which is a good thing because we're supposed to use glucose in the mitochondria as energy, ATP. And theoretically, that was supposed to get me to run harder, but it was probably a placebo, if anything. But the other side chain of sucrose or sugar is fructose. Fructose I consider it inert. It's an extra sugar moiety that doesn't do anything. So you present the body with glucose, cool. After it splits the sucrose, you also present it with fructose, bad. Bad because it just has to be detoxified by the liver. And I explained that previously. But so you're killing yourself to use sugar as your energy source because of all this other shit. So, excuse me. The objective with using nutrition, seeking out food, being happy around the dinner table, the objective is to just give yourself enough fuel to make it through the day. So if you have just enough fuel to make it through a 24-hour day, no matter if you're using your brain with IT support, or you're actually swinging a sledgehammer out in the concrete, or you're watching kids, it doesn't matter. But we all have a balance of how many energy packets we're supposed to take in per day. So that old concept of calories in, calories out, no, Gary Taubes talked about it in his book, and he elucidated the history of how food industry and bad information has been making us fatter and more diseased. This is a cool book, small. Hugo Rodier. I learned about him when I moved to Florida after I gave up medicine for a while. Very nice information for sugar and how it's really affecting and changing our lives. It's so hard to get around it because if you look at what happens when you take in sugar, I'm not talking about glucose. You should have two labels. The sugar is processed. Glucose is the basic building block that is sprinkled into sugar, but glucose is what floats around in your bloodstream. A lot of people stick their fingers and they say their sugar level, or they ask for their blood test. What's my sugar level? It's not sugar. What's in your bloodstream is glucose. So if you stick your finger as a diabetic, or I get a blood test and I say your glucose level is greater than 100, technically that's called prediabetes. So it's a misnomer. You can't say sugar in the bloodstream. You say sugar in your kitchen table, sugar in your food, sugar in the processed food that you have, or on the dinner table or in the fridge. But what's in your bloodstream is glucose. So you're not supposed to get to a level greater than 100 as far as glucose. If you get greater than 100, then the body theoretically has to secrete insulin. For every glucose molecule, you have to have insulin it's a locking key. When there's glucose around and insulin binds with it, the lock is unlocked and the glucose is allowed to go into the cell to be utilized as energy. That's the basic building block. But the problem is, if you just have massive amounts of glucose because you're taking in way too much sugar, this will fool you. I mean, back in World War II, it was like 15 grams of sugar per average American per day. Now, some teenagers with the concentrated high fructose corn syrups that you have in food groups and pop, preserved foods, processed foods, it's up to like 79 to 80 grams per day. That's got to go somewhere. So if you don't utilize that, that would be going into storage, fat. If you do utilize it, cool, but there's no way you can utilize fructose. So what does the liver have to do? It has to break it down, detoxify it, or store it. And it doesn't want to store it, but if it does, it gets to be a fatty liver. So those of you with fatty liver, that's not good. It leads to cirrhosis. It's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. And that will eventually increase your chances for cirrhosis, hepatitis, and liver failure. So when I usually check a patient's glucose level, that's the first step. In blood testing, I also include an insulin level to see where you're at. Because if the glucose is normal, which is usually the case, or slightly elevated, you might get a pass from your doctor saying, okay, well, work on your weight. But I've been including insulins because all the folks that I did glucose levels on, even got something of a special test called the hemoglobin A1C, which does have its errors. A lot of people with very heavy BMIs, a lot of people would get a pass. And it's like, well, that doesn't make sense. I can give you a thumbs up on your blood test, but I'll have to give you a thumbs up down on where we're going with this, especially if you are an average American and you gain 1 to 5 pounds every year. So the problem is, or what I've been doing is doing insulin levels, and bingo, I'm finding insulin levels are ranked up high. So an insulin level of 4, pretty good. See my other videos on insulin. An insulin level greater than 4, you're insulin resistant. Insulin resistance is the first step into that problem. It leads to cirrhosis and insulin resistance. So when you're insulin resistant, then what usually happens is leptin is secreted to tell the brain, stop, don't eat anymore. But if you continue to have high insulin resistance, it's a negative feedback, it's bad. Your cells ignore the signals saying, your cells ignore the insulin. So you have elevated insulin and glucose in the bloodstream, which is very dangerous and irritating because the key can't unlock the lock because the cell has double locked itself. So the usual glucose and insulin unlocking the key to get into the cell, it can't because the cell had to protect itself. Too much insulin, too much glucose, nobody gets in. So now you have excessive amounts of insulin, excessive amounts of glucose in the bloodstream, and the brain says, wait a minute, I can't get any energy. I'm going to make this guy eat more because all that insulin and glucose in the bloodstream is just floating around. It's damaging the lining. It's causing elevated cholesterol, and it's not getting into the mitochondria where it is needed to produce energy. So the brain, the gut, the heart, they think you're starving when in actuality you got all this fluid, blood, glucose floating around, but it can't be utilized, so you pee it off. Or you store it in fat. Not good. Triglycerides, the liver can convert all that stuff to triglycerides. That's not good. It gets into the fat. So watch your triglyceride level too. But what I wanted to end with was if the insulin constantly is elevated, the leptin will also go up, has a last ditch effort to tell it comes from fat. Leptin is a hormone that comes from fat. I'm starting to check those now, if insurance will cover. But leptin gets secreted by the fat cells when the fat cells get way too stuffed up to send a message to the brain, stop eating, stop hunting, stop craving, But if there's high amounts of leptin that are always floating around because there's always insulin and you're getting insulin resistant, same thing happens with the leptin, become leptin resistant, and the brain doesn't recognize there's high leptin levels. So it continues to think starvation. It continues to block or ignore the signals from the fat cells that are saying, hey, we're overstuffed. So what do? You make them overstuffed, overstuffed. So this is a bad cycle. It causes you to get tired because the brain, the heart, the muscles have no energy, causes you to hunt. That's why usually the old theory of eating, I don't agree with eating every couple hours. I mean, there's other things like gut problems, irritable bowel syndrome, absorption, mitochondrial and genetic problems. There's a whole bunch of other things that play into adjusting the diet. But for the average American that has to eat a snack, has to eat 3 big meals and 2 snacks, or 3 big meals and 2 pops. I have Mark, who I'm trying to get him to lead a healthy life. He's overweight, and his glucose is floating high, but his insulin that I checked is really high. So the objective with Mark is to figure out, well, what's going on that's causing it? Because it sounds like he's eating okay. And then I broke it down. He broke it down to me and said, well, I'm having 2 diet Pepsis a day. And you would figure 2 a day is not a big deal. 12 ounces with breakfast or with lunch and dinner. Not a big deal, but if you look at the sugar substitute in the diet Pepsi, it still initiates a response. I mean, it certainly isn't sugar, which is why the food industry fooled us. It's not sugar, but it still elicits a response. If your brain tastes something super sweet, then it's going to think if your tongue tastes something super sweet, it's going to send a message to the brain, woo, that's sweet. And even if it doesn't even if it doesn't directly cause an insulin spike, the brain will still say something sweet's coming, better get the insulin going, better get the leptin. So so that's the problem. And then there's other calories in that, and it's bad for your teeth. So this is what I do with Mark. I said, I will compromise with you. Instead of having the Diet Pepsi twice a day, let's go with Aldi's carbonated water with some kind of natural flavor. Let's go with those to substitute the 2 Diet Pepsis. And just to get him to bite, I had to compromise. I think everybody has to compromise. I said, have some bacon. And my registered dietitians are probably getting really pissed off with me, but crunchy, sweet, fatty bacon. If you put that in your meal instead of the 2 carbohydrate, sugar substituted cans of pop, high fructose corn syrup, I think that's a nice compromise as a first step. If I can get Mark to do that as a compromise, maybe for a month to 3 months, and I check his blood tests again, or maybe he sprinkles in a little exercise too, maybe he spreads out the meals, gets rid of the 2 pops, I think it'll be the first step. And then it's going to daisy chain. Once he is showing me success, it'll daisy chain into the next change in life. So I think everybody deserves, there's no one algorithm that works for everybody. Patients are really personal. They need personalized care. And in Mark's case, I just wanted to do one step. I can't tell everybody to be a vegan. I've been a vegan for since 2018. I'm cool with it. I can still have muscle. I just worked out now in my basement. I'm okay. So, but when I go into fasting mode, I can get my beta hydroxybutyrate levels high. I can get my insulin levels super low. I've never checked my leptin, but I will be doing it next time. This COVID crap has given me an extra 10 pounds that I don't want. I'm getting my strength back, but I'm going to also change up my eating style just for a short time to get back to where I was. Just like Mark, just like most of my other patients. Sometimes it's not get to be a vegan or get to be ketosis or get to be paleo or get to be 1 meal a day. It might not be going straight into that. Eventually there might have to be direction and a goal, a summit, but sometimes you have to do small steps, bite-sized steps to get to that success rate. And sometimes blood tests are necessary to say, hey, even if you're not noticing a change in your waistline or your overall scale weight, your BMI, sometimes if the blood tests show it, I'll still give a thumbs up. We're in the right direction, which is sometimes a deal breaker. If your effort is terrible, I'm not terrible, but if your effort is, you're putting everything into it, you're starving, you're avoiding everything, and then 3 months your blood test is like nothing, it's so frustrating. It breaks your morale, and we need morale to keep us in the game to get to the summit. Sometimes the summit changes, it doesn't matter, but ultimately the big summit is going to be staying independent, walking, thinking properly, and getting to like 100 years of age. I think it'd be cool to see a great-great-grandchild. But if you do that and you don't even know your name, or you're peeing on yourself, or you're in a wheelchair and your great-great-grandchild has to feed you, the ultimate goal with, I think, healthy lifestyle is to compress morbidity. And that means you don't have any, you age, but at one point in time, at 90 or 100, you die fast because of something, stroke, heart attack. But what we're having in the United States is age, get to 40, 50, have a disease. 60, have a more disease and disabled. So when you have diseases, even if you're taking medicines and you're disabled, that is no life. And if you feel lousy, that's no life. That'll break your morale to keep on living before you get to 70, and then you'll be a veggie, because ultimately we want to avoid Alzheimer's disease, massive heart attack. We live through heart attacks now. You got people with stents, you got people with bypass, still eating bad food, still totally stressed out, not exercising. What kind of life is that? Diabetes type 3 is an acronym or a nickname for Alzheimer's disease. So I'm not fully keto. I think everybody needs a little bit of a personalized diet, but I think vegan is fine. I think ketosis is fine. It's kind of cool. A lot of the data with being a keto follower or fat adapted with a well-formulated ketogenic diet, I think the data is great. The information from way back when with Atkins, he had some anecdotal stories, but the data was weak. So paleo, it's okay. Keto, I love the community. I love the data. Vegan, vegetarian, low fat, high carb, I think is fair. And again, that's what I'm doing. And it all started because of my friend Bob, who had a heart attack in the clinic. He was evolving his heart attack, and too young of a guy to have it. He survived, but I continued on. And it wasn't his ultimate, and that's fine, because he's got kids and a wife that don't practice that. So I think there has to be other things. That's why it has to be personalized. But the information from Dean Ornish, as far as high fat, vegetable, is also robust as far as information. And now Ornish is taking the vegan diet and applying it to prostate cancer in situ, telomere length, and finding good success. So I'm not one camp versus the other. I am for my patient. I'll apply any rules, any data to the specific patient to get the best success. So sometimes you go down this rabbit hole if you go one way or another. It's very polarized if you look online, but it's not about one better than the other. It's about having you guys survive. So hopefully this gives you, with me telling you about Mark's story, an idea about what's bad. Maybe the first step is just get sugar out of your diet. Maybe work on healthy carbs, and maybe time your meals. That'd be the first thing. Now, as far as later, we'll talk about that in future details or future tutorials. So don't forget to subscribe to me. And again, share this if it helps. Hopefully this gave you a couple of basic building blocks on being on your guard when you go shopping. I mean, the food now is totally different than the food when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. So it looks the same, but it's much more potent. So hang in there. Hopefully this, if you have any questions, put them down below. But hopefully this gives you more building blocks to get more knowledge. Seek out there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that's good. There's a lot of stuff that's bad, but seek out some communities that you might bond with. And I'll see you in the next video.